to Grade 8 History, Unit Number 2, Canada's Changing Society, 1890 to 1914. This is Lesson Number 20. What was life like for new immigrants? Before we begin today's video, let's consider the following. What challenges do you think immigrants to Canada faced during the late 1800s and early 1900s? When I'm finished speaking, I want you to put the video on pause so that you can consider this question and then write down your response. And let's begin. Like newcomers to Canada today, many immigrants who came to Canada during the period 1896 to 1914 found themselves in a place where the climate, language, clothing, and traditions were very different. Immigrants were often encouraged to wear North American clothing in order to help them fit in more easily in Canadian society. Before coming to Canada, many immigrants had farmed communally or cooperatively in their home countries. They were promised that they could continue this practice in Canada. The farmland on the prairies was often distributed in a pattern of block settlements. This meant that a group of people from the same cultural group were allowed to settle on farms next to each other. Settling in groups meant that new immigrants could help each other get their farms started. It also meant that new immigrants were surrounded by familiar people, languages, religions, and customs. It was hard work settling in the new country and building homesteads. Homes were often built in forests and swampy areas using logs, clay, and soil. In some families, the men had to leave their homesteads for months in order to work on other farms, in mines, or on the railways to raise money for their families. And this photo shows a Ukrainian homestead in Alberta in the early 1900s. What work do you think went into building this homestead? Please put the video on pause so that you can take a closer look at this picture and write down your response to the question in blue. Alright, let's carry on. Ukrainian immigrants often lived in block settlements on the prairies. The largest Ukrainian block settlement was located near Edmonton, Alberta. There is still a large Ukrainian-Canadian population there today. It was also hard work to settle the land on the prairies. The new farmers often came from poverty and had limited resources to help them get started. Everyone in the family had to work hard, often in isolation from their neighbors, with few tools and machines to help. In some cases, the First Nations helped the newcomers. For example, in 1909, a friendship began between the Cree on the Muskeg Lake Reserve and the Doukhobors in Saskatchewan. A Cree farmer, Jim Greyeyes, provided 4 horses and his own worker to help the Doukhobor women turn the soil. And this photo shows Doukhobor women pulling a plow in Manitoba in 1899. My question for you is, what does this photo reveal about the challenges of farming on the prairies at this time? When I'm finished speaking, please put the video on pause so you can take a closer look at this picture and then write down your response to the question in blue. Okay, let's continue. Today, most descendants of the Doukhobors live in British Columbia. The movement of so many Doukhobors from the prairies is due to a broken government promise. When Clifford Sifton was Minister of the Interior, he promised the Doukhobors that they would have the freedom to maintain their cultural practices in their new home. However, Sifton's replacement, Frank Oliver, wanted to see British immigrants living on the prairie land that the Doukhobors had cleared. He claimed the Doukhobors refused to sign an oath of allegiance, and he started reclaiming their land. Oliver also claimed that the Doukhobors had not cleared the land fast enough, so they could not be allowed to settle in communities in Saskatchewan. Between 1867 and 1948, 100,000 British children were sent to live and work on farms in Canada. These children were known as home children because they were chosen from orphanages or homes in Britain. Typically, home children were between the ages of 16 and 18. And in this photo, these British home children are arriving in St. John, New Brunswick. What details do you notice about the children in this photo? When I finish speaking, please put the video on pause so that you can take another look at this picture and then write down your response to the question in blue. Okay, moving on. As we learned earlier, 15,000 Chinese people moved to Canada in the 1880s to work on the railway. After the railway, many could not afford to travel back to China. Instead, they moved across Canada to find work. Most settled in the West, and many became entrepreneurs. They worked in laundries, cafes, and restaurants. Starting in the 1890s, Canadian cities began to develop their own Chinatowns. These areas allowed Chinese people to attend social gatherings, buy Chinese goods, and send money back to their families in China. Today, approximately 70% of Chinese Canadians live in either Toronto or Vancouver. And this photo shows people celebrating at the Chinese New Year parade in Vancouver in 2014. Most Jewish immigrants lived in the cities. Most newcomers spoke Yiddish and did not know English or French. They found work as peddlers, tailors, and shopkeepers. They established synagogues, schools, and newspapers. Their lives were still difficult, however, as they faced anti-Semitism in Canada. Sadly, many Jewish families ended up living in slums, in overpopulated and run-down parts of the city. And this photo from 1904 shows Winnipeg's New Jerusalem community. My question for you is, how do you think people felt living here? When I finish speaking, please put the video on pause so that you can take a closer look at the people in this photo, and then you can write down your thoughts on how you felt, on how you think people felt about living in this community. Alright, and let's wrap things up. Let's finish today's video by considering the following. 1. What might be some intended and unintended consequences of people living in block settlements? And 2. Which immigrant group do you think had the most challenging circumstances to overcome in Canada? Why do you feel this way? As always, when I finish speaking, you're going to put the video on pause so that you can write down your responses to these two questions. If you don't feel confident in your ability to answer one or both of these questions, it means you need to put the video on pause don't put the video on pause. Go back to the beginning and watch this video at least one more time. And then when you're feeling confident, put the video on pause so that you can work on these two questions. Alright, I look forward to hearing your responses to these and the other questions posted throughout this recording. But until tomorrow's class, this concludes today's video.